All right, so for the last couple of lectures, our topics, we're going to talk about restoration ecology and conservation ecology. And so we're going to start this lecture on ecosystems and really kind of how they process energy. And then we will spend the next little short video on restoration. So what are the dynamics of energy and chemical nutrients in an ecosystem? So you can see where we have energy flow and we have photosynthesis and we have decomposition and all kinds of different things. So it kind of gives you an idea of how the energy is flowing. And it's really coming from the sun is where we get most of our energy, and then some of the chemicals are recycled. So we'll look at this very lightly. We're not going to go into too much detail. But there are a few things we do want you to know. First of all, by definition, what an ecosystem actually is. So I've got two definitions which are really the same thing, but I wanted to present it in two different ways. So the first one is the sum of all the biotic and abiotic factors that interact in a given area. And so that's a good definition. The only thing I would like to stress is the sum of all the biotic factors that interact in a given area is called a community. So it's really, you're taking that community level and you're adding the abiotic factors. What I mean by abiotic factors are sunlight, water, soil, minerals, things like that. So temperature. So you want to keep those things in mind. So here we have several different ecosystems. This is a desert ecosystem. We have a coral reef ecosystem. And then we have a riparian ecosystem. And so you can see in here, lots of the biotic are easy to see with the trees. We have some cattails, assuming that's what those are. Bulrush, we have some, probably that looks like a palo verde, so some trees in the background. And then we have some shrubs out here. And I'm sure there are some wildlife. There's some kind of algae growing on the top of the little pond, and I'm sure there's animals inside there. So that would be an ecosystem. On the bottom right, we have a coral reef with, again, the abiotics easy to see. We have turtles and fish, and then the coral themselves. And then we also have abiotic factors here I didn't mention, which would be the summer heat, the sunlight, obviously the water, and maybe even soil conditions. Here we would have some rocks, also the water with salinity, temperature, things like that. And then here we have another one, same thing with a bunch of plants. Hard to tell where these trees are from. But again, the water and the rocks and things would be abiotic. So just to kind of give you an idea of how this differs. All right, so the other thing we want to do, and we've already really talked about some of this in the last test, so I don't want to really repeat it. In these nutrient dynamics, you have your trophic levels, what we talked about earlier, your primary producers, which are the photosynthetic organisms, and then the different levels of consumers. So we're going to let that go. I think we've already done that. But I wanted to show you this picture with all the chemical and energy flowing through, so you can realize, it's not as straightforward. This would be more food web looking. And we didn't really talk about the decomposers. Those are things usually bacteria and fungi, although they can be other things that break down stuff. And then we have something called detritus, which I would like you to know. It's non-living organic material. So things that have dropped off and have been dead, especially like leaves, fecal matter, things like that. So anyway, so this is kind of the system I want you to know. And then we'll talk about global energy budgets. Now, what we do want you to know is your book says approximately about 50% of the sunlight never makes it to the earth, and that's true. Probably closer to 52% was the last year I got. That was like 2018, I think I got. So scattered because of clouds, dust in the atmosphere. All right. And so each day the Earth is bombarded by approximately 10 to the 22nd joules of solar radiation. And then it's broken down into the 1 joule is equal to 0.239 calories. I'm not sure how worried I am about that. 52% we already mentioned. 48% reaches the earth. I think the big number on here, though, is out of that 48%, only 1% of that is actually taken in by plants to be pushed into this web that we're looking at here. So that's really what I want you to get at, is only 1%. And then we talked about the trophic levels from that 1% that finally gets converted by plants. If you eat the plants, you only get 10% of that 1%. And then if you eat something of these plants, you get 10% of the 10% of the 1%. So that's where I kind of want your brain to go. And then there's these ideas of gross primary production. And that's really how much energy is converted into glucose by photosynthetic organisms. And then there's the net PP, which, you know, you have a gross amount of money you make on your paycheck, and the net is what you take home. So this is kind of the same thing. And the net primary production, what it takes into account is how much of that energy is not going to move through the cycling, the ecosystem cycling, because that organism is going to actually use that for cellular respiration and do work. So, and it's expressed again in joules per meter second per year times year, or biomass. And I'm giving you those because biomass is one way that they often look at how to measure how much production is coming out of an ecosystem. Biomass is something that's probably easier to calculate. And so there are some problems with biomass because there's a tropical forest has a large amount of biomass, but how much are the new biomass are they producing? So different ways of looking at it. So that can skew information, but I just wanted you to see this because as you move on, if you take other courses like ecology courses, they might have you measuring biomass and looking at it. So I want you to kind of understand why they're doing that. And so what I would like to do now is talk about primary production in aquatic ecosystems, and then we'll do the same for terrestrial. And so what you're finding here is two of the biggest things is light limitations and nutrient limitations. And so again, the light limitations, if you remember from the last test, the photic zone is where the light will go through. Half the solar radiation is absorbed in the first 15 meters in water. And depending on how clear that water is, may not go much further down. Some real clear water, I forget what the numbers might be, only 35 meters down by the time it stops, or 45 somewhere there. So anyway, the reason I give you that is light limitations. You would assume that because of the way the tilt of the earth, and we talked about that we would have more productivity right at the equator. And we do in some parts, you can see, with the yellows here and the greens here and here. But we got some red up here even. And so you might question that. And so what we're finding is that a lot of this nutrient limitation is actually not due always to the light, which definitely is a factor, but also to the nutrients. And it's usually nitrogen and phosphorus. These are the two major ones. And they did a Long Island experiment, and that's the one down here on the bottom. And what they did is they were trying to figure out phytoplankton and how it grew. And what they realized, here's the controls, and then they thought, well, let's give it phosphates. Turns out it's not the phosphates that is actually the problem there. It is the nitrogen. And then the Sargasso Sea example, a phytoplankton that's over here, they did another study, and they found out that they added a bunch of nitrogen and phosphorus only, and they didn't really get much of an increase. And then they added some arrows excluding iron, they didn't really get an increase. And even here without the other metals, you can see it jumped drastically. So most of that has to do with iron. So when you're looking at these areas, often you will look for what is the limiting factor. And in that case, it was iron. All right, so primary production in terrestrial ecosystems, same thing. You're going to get your nitrogen and phosphorus from nutrient limitations, but annual temperature and rainfall is by far one of the bigger factors. And we saw this. We've already saw this picture before when we looked at biomes. So I just repeated it here, and you kind of got this Venn diagram showing where there's overlap and. But that kind of situates where things are, and then this might be more localized in those given biomes. So nitrogen is often a problem, and this is actually the second one spelled wrong. I just realized the root nodules are a symbiotic relationship for plants that actually have these root nodules that have bacteria in it that allow them to actually add nitrogen to the soil. So that is an adaptation in some plants that actually have that grow in nitrogen poised soil. Phosphatases, there should be an S right here. Nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, this is for the phosphorus. Obviously, these are enzymes that are able to break down phosphates and make phosphates available to plants. And then we'll have chelating agents that actually can break down other things for some of the minerals and stuff they need. So there's definitely limitations. So here's what I do want. This is not from our book, but I want you to look at this and look at the terrestrial analysis for gross and net production. And this is actually net primary production for different ecosystems. And so I would like you to know which ones are really kind of putting it out there. And so what you're going to find for terrestrial, it's swamps and marshes and tied with tropical rainforests. These areas about swamps and marshes are either freshwater or can be a mixture of fresh and salt. But then again, when you talk about the waters themselves, we go down to what we call an estuary. But these are high in nutrients. Okay, so being high in nutrients gives you lots of biomass and usually lots of life. So these are kind of the two major terrestrial ones. Estuaries are where salt and freshwater mix, and so you kind of get this mixture also of nutrients for and lots and lots of species. Our local estuary, probably the best one, is Newport Back Bay. Also Bolsa Chica, I'll talk about a little bit later, is another one. A third one that we kind of have here that is at Camp Pendleton, although that estuary is a bit smaller and can't be reached by most people. And then actually San Francisco technically is a large estuary that unfortunately has been filled in with a bunch of stuff, but still works as an estuary. The problem is in California, especially 95% of all estuaries have pretty much been taken out or at least hammered, so they're fairly can barely be recognized. So one of our most protective ecosystems. So we want you to know that. And climate change on production. So we're going to talk about climate change a little bit more too, but I want you to realize that NPP was actually increasing by 6% from 82 to 99. So there was an increase. And then all of a sudden we hit the drought, and high drought made high stress index, we're going to look at plants here. And so these plant communities were under attack. The plants were highly stressed. And then we get increased hot fires going through there. And because several different factors, we now have bark beetle issues where the trees are dying, which then cycles through again to more fires. A plant stressed doesn't have its ability to do things like photosynthesize. They kind of go into a state of shock and shut down, which is not good for the plant. There's not a lot of new biomass being produced. What you have to understand with the fires is that, the plants tend to dry out. You'll see our local news is now giving kind of a moisture rate during the summer. I'm not sure how helpful that is for the general public, but you got to also know about the bark beetle. Because of climate change, one of the problems is They really couldn't, on healthy forests, they really couldn't get a foothold or a strong foothold. They were there, but the trees could tolerate them. But what has happened is twofold: is when they're stressed, the bark beetle is hard for the plant to make sap and things to keep it from being attacked. And the other thing is because they have the cold winters, but they're shorter, what we're finding is the beetles can actually overwinter, and they can actually be there for the next season. And that season is actually longer, which gives them more time to breed. So definitely having issues with the bark beetles in some of our California national parks. All right, and then we have the geochemical cycles, where you can see things are kind of moving through. You have your biology and reservoir A, your organic material. You have it breaking down into peat, coal, and oil, which is long-term non-renewable resources. And then it gets put back in as inorganic materials that are available as nutrients, which life can use, or eventually can become go into inorganic materials, which is unvariable at nutrients and minerals and rocks. Now some weathering and erosion can send that back out. So there's all kinds of different things that are happening here. And again, we just want to make sure you realize it's complex. And there's cycles that you should take just a quick look over. I don't want you to lose sleep over. But here we have the water cycle. And so that one's pretty easy. I think we've talked about water enough. Here we have a CO2 cycle. And you can see all the CO2 being released in the air now. It can be captured again in plants. So you hear this about carbon. Basically having a carbon footprint, and we're trying to grab onto this carbon, find ways to pull it out of the air. And trees will do that, actually, the planting of trees. So most of the CO2 comes from burning of fossil fuels, wood, and oil. But you can see there's also a lot coming out of just us breathing and decomposition. So lots of CO2 in there. All right, moving on to nitrogen and phosphorus. I just wanted to bring these in too, because this was the two that were mentioned. So you want to take a quick look at these, and you can see nitrogen released in the air, and most of our air actually is nitrogen. But it can be put in, and plants and things do need nitrogen to grow, obviously. But a lot of that can also be released into the air, which can cause nitric oxides, which are part of what's making the ocean acidic. And then over here on the right, we have phosphorus, a little bit different. Again, plants can take up PO4, and animals need that and can consume. And so a lot of that gets put into the ocean, and you have that moving around. So phosphorus is another one of those that are really needed for plants and then for the bottom of the food chain. And so we will end there.